This video is supported by Clearview Cyclones. Clearview provided the CV1800 dust collector in my last shop and offered to upgrade the unit to their new EF5 dust collector in this shop. If you would like to support a company that helps me do what I do, take a look at the Clearview line of dust collectors for your shop. Use the coupon code J5 for 5% off your next purchase. Hey folks, how you guys doing? Hope you're all having a great day today. This is part 6 of the new shop series covering my dust collection system. So this is, as you can see behind me, already installed. It is the Clearview EF5 dust collector, NordFab ducting. It is an amazing setup. So before I rewind to the installation date for this dust collection system, just want to touch base on a couple things. First, in my last shop, I had a Clearview CV1800 dust collection system, which is very similar to this one, except it is a clear assembly so you can see what's going on inside it. This particular setup is slightly stronger because I'm using a 16-inch impeller with this one versus the 15-inch impeller that I had in my last setup. I did bring a couple items from that dust collection system to this one. I am reusing the motor, so I didn't have to cover any of the wiring on it. It was already wired up, which is a very simple, straightforward process. And I am reusing my dust collection bin and electrical setup. So I took those items and we upgraded everything else to this larger unit. Now, installing this was a very simple process. It took us about 5 hours, 6 total hours, but we had an hour-long lunch. So about 5 hours to do the entire dust collection system from pieces in a box to completely set up, which is pretty incredible. Also, to help me do the installation, Paul from Clearview Cyclones and his son Josh came out to help me that day, which was a very big help. It was a super productive day with some really cool folks. Anyway, before I just keep rambling on forever, I'm going to rewind and go back to the day where we installed this. So, yeah. First up is to unbox everything and take inventory of all of the ducting parts. In this case, I'm using NordFab. NordFab is on the higher end of dust collection ducting, but it's also a great example of you get what you pay for. You really do in this case. This is some top-notch stuff. All of these pieces have a quick fit rolled edge on the ends, which, as you will see in just a bit, provides easy connection to other components in the system with the use of a barrel type clamp. A specifically designed gasket inside the clamp seals the joint tightly, and just as quick and easy as it is to install, quick fit ducting is also easy to uninstall and relocate as you move machinery or have other changes in work areas. Just like with any other project in woodworking or anything in life for that matter, proper planning will result in a much more efficient process that results in an expected end result. Less time wasted, less money wasted on extra stuff that's not needed, and you're more likely to get to the exact result you envisioned from the beginning. In this case, I finalized a layout of all the shop tools that not only had emphasis on efficient workflow between the stations, but it also had emphasis on an efficient dust collection run. Then I used that layout to determine what was needed for each one of the drops, then determine what was needed for the main run of ducting, and then determine the location of the center point for the dust collector as well as all of the other drops, which will allow me to measure off the same 2 walls in the shop to locate each one of those center points on the floor and mark them with masking tape for reference during the install. Here you can see the location for the dust collector. This one is for the tool island drop that will hook up to the router table, CNC machine bandsaw, and jointer planer combo machine. And this one is for the table saw, homemade router table, and drum sander. Once Paul and his son Josh arrived, we started the system install with the dust collector, specifically the Cyclone stand. The stand consists of an upper frame, a center frame, longer lower legs, and shorter upper legs. Assembly is completed upside down, starting with the upper frame, then the short legs are added, followed by the center frame, and finally the long lower legs. Before flipping the stand over, all of the components are secured with a few set screws. Then the stand can be flipped over and put into position. In regards to the center point that I initially laid out on the floor, we ended up having to shift the stand a foot or so to one side to clear the trusses in the ceiling during the dust collector assembly. You might notice that one leg it looks like it's a little bit bent here. It's not bent. One of the set screws was actually loose, and I didn't really notice it until after the Cyclone was installed. Speaking of the dust collector, the completed Clearview EF5 Cyclone and stand will have a final height of 112 and 1/4 of an inch, to be exact. Keep in mind that an additional 6 inches of height is necessary when installing the motor and impeller later on, and in my case, the bottom of the trusses, it's about 9.5 feet from the floor, so I do have the room for the completed assembly, but we did have to take advantage of the space between the trusses for assembly. Next, the Cyclone assembly starts by installing the intake chute with a few bolts onto the upper cylinder. And the fit it's pretty tight here, but it is still recommended to seal the connection with clear silicone after assembly, which I did at a later date. Then the upper cylinder can be set into place and rotated as needed. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe we removed the cone clamp in order for the upper cylinder to fit onto the stand. So right after that, we added it back to be used in just a little bit. Next, we can work on the blower housing, and a few items are packed in here for shipping purposes. First, the motor plate is removed, followed by the neoprene gasket and taper lock bushing, and finally the impeller is unbolted and removed. Next, the gasket is set on top of the upper cylinder, making sure to line up the bolt holes on the gasket with the bolt holes in the upper cylinder. The upper cylinder is carefully set into place next, making sure to line up the holes accordingly and to not shift the gasket any. Doing so will just be a little bit frustrating trying to get the bolts in place. The orientation of the upper cylinder also determines the location of the filter stack, so be sure to take that into consideration as well. And here's a view showing all of the bolts on the inside. The motor assembly is next, and as I said earlier, I am reusing the motor from my last Cyclone, as it's the exact same Leeson 5 horsepower motor that comes with the EF5, so because of that, I won't show wiring the whip to the motor because, well, it's already done. The motor plate is then bolted to the motor with 4 bolts, but before the impeller can be added to the motor, the taper lock bushing is added to the impeller. Be mindful that it is extremely important to install the bushing properly. Using the wrong holes in the bushing can result in the impeller coming off during use, which can be very, very dangerous. There's a couple things going on with this bushing. First, this is the set screw that will hold the motor key. This is the slot that will capture the motor key, and a matching slot is cut into the shaft of the motor. These threaded holes on the bushing are to be used only for removing the bushing from the impeller. For installation, the screws pass through these non-threaded holes in the bushing into the threaded holes in the impeller. If you install the impeller using the threaded holes in the bushing, the impeller will come off during use and you will likely crap your pants when it happens. So save some underwear and install it the right way. With the bushing loosely mounted to the impeller, the key can be set into the key slot on the motor shaft, and the impeller assembly is slid onto the motor shaft, tilting the impeller so that the key slot on the bushing lines up with the key on the shaft, making the process just a little bit easier. The top of the bushing is lined up with the top of the motor shaft, and the screws are tightened in a sequence. After the slack is removed from the screws, each screw is tightened 1/4 of a turn at a time in the same consecutive order until all the screws are properly tightened. Then the key is secured with the small set screw and the motor assembly is ready to be installed. The motor assembly is pretty heavy at this point, so an extra set of hands will likely be necessary to set it in place. It's positioned on 4 bolt studs coming through the top of the blower housing, and it's also important to note that the motor assembly was positioned so the wiring is on the same side as my electrical box that I previously mounted to the wall. And finally, the motor assembly is secured to the blower housing. The filter stack is next, starting by adding the flex hose to the filter flange, and then the other end of the flex hose is secured to the exhaust side of the blower housing. There's plenty enough hose here for you to wiggle the filters around or position them however you need. Here you can see the quick fit hose flange that is used on the exit side, and if you wired up a new motor, you can remove this fitting quickly when the motor is spinning down to visually see if the impeller is spinning in the correct direction. Now, of course, do not remove this with the machine running, and do not turn the machine on when this is open, but it can be quickly removed after powering down the motor. Anything that makes its way past the dust bin will be collected in the filter stack, which consists of 2 filters sitting on top of a cleanout box. A bead of clear silicone is added on top of one of the filters. The other filter is stacked on top of the first, making sure that the filter seams are lined up with one another, and a metal band clamp will hold the filters together. The bottom of the cleanout box has 3 bolts that can be backed out as needed to level the filter stack. And once the box is leveled, the filters are stacked on top and secured with a bead of silicone, and then slid into the corner of the shop where they'll basically live forever and never move. After a bead of silicone is added to the top of the top filter, the flange is secured with a few screws. Finally, the cone is added to the upper cylinder, and the dustbin hose is added to the cone. Now, the length of this hose does matter slightly, so here's a tip for you. Stretch out the hose as much as you can in its installed state. That might mean you have to remove some of the hose. That way, when you take the lid off of the dust bin, the hose will retract slightly, pulling the lid up and out of the way for you to more easily remove the dust bin. And right about here is where I noticed that the back right leg was loose, so I went around and made sure every set screw on the stand was tightened. I did find one that was loose back there, which that's what was causing the leg to look bent earlier on in the process. At this point, we fired up the machine for the first time, and after powering it down, Paul removed the exhaust hose to verify the impeller was spinning in the correct direction. Now, this wasn't entirely necessary for this particular installation, as I was using a motor that was already wired properly, but just for demonstration purposes, he did confirm it. So here it is. This is the completed Cyclone. One final optional step is to bolt the legs of the stand to the floor and then bolt the Cyclone to the stand. However, it's completely optional. Everything fits as it should. I don't have any of my other stationary tools in the shop bolted to the floor, so I really didn't see a need to bolt this to the floor. But if you want to do so, there are mounting holes for you to do that. After breaking for lunch, we got to work on the ducting by laying out the main run on the floor and getting a game plan for the order of installation. The game plan was to assemble sections on the floor and then lift those larger sections into place. Between the quick fit flanges and the barrel type clamps, assembling this Nordfab is not only quick and easy, but it's actually a lot of fun. It reminded me of being a kid and engineering a really cool item out of Legos, except this time, basically a big kid snapping everything together to connect all of my big kid toys. It really is an easy process. It really is. One helpful tip though is to pre-stress the clamps slightly by closing them over just one side of a joint before you connect the two pieces together. With them on the floor, it's not that big of a deal, but if you're doing this overhead, pre-stressing the clamps, it'll help out a lot. Every clamp is closed and then locked closed with a cotter pin. Now this initial large section can be installed on the Cyclone. The EF5 comes standard with a Nordfab quick fit connection, so attaching to the Cyclone is just as easy as assembling the rest of the system. You don't necessarily need a scaffold for 2 people to install this system. Paul mentioned that a second person on the ground could use a push broom to support the other end of the system as needed, while someone on a ladder made all of the connections. There are a lot of options to secure the ducting to whatever sealing type that you have, but in my case, I used an inexpensive metal pipe strapping and washer head screws to secure the ducting to the exposed trusses. It was the quickest and least expensive route. After the initial 5 feet of straight pipe intake and the 9-degree elbow, a level is used to make sure that the rest of the horizontal pieces were indeed horizontal. The rest of the system is just the same thing over and over again. Position, snap together, support with strapping. Super easy, super fast. So we continued the main trunk all the way down to the table saw before working on any of the branches. The first branch was the tool island, and also where we had to cut the first section of straight pipe to get the distance that we needed. Now, by holding the 90-degree elbow in place, kind of just eyeballing it where it needs to be, I can measure the distance needed between these two pieces. The adjustable nipples allow you to easily dial in the exact length needed, so all we had to do was get close, basically. First, the length is marked all the way around the pipe, and then the pipe can be cut a variety of different ways. Paul brought his portable metal cutting bandsaw, so while he lowered the blade, Josh was able to spin the pipe around to make a really clean cut. Then the burr is removed on both the inside and outside. The interior diameter of the nipples is slightly larger than the outside diameter of the straight pipe, so the pipe fits inside the nipple. Now, once together, the pieces can be moved as necessary to get the exact length needed. And to help maintain the correct distance, I used a marker to put a dot on the pipe where they will go, or where they will join. That way, if I slide them around, I can easily get back to the same point. Then the rubber O-ring is rolled onto the pipe side of the joint to act as the quick fit rolled edge, and a clamp is installed just the same way. Finally, the 90-degree elbow was added before lifting it into place. Once again, a lot of repetition. Add a section, make sure it's level, support it with pipe strapping. The miter saw station drop is the first place where we added a blast gate. Each one of these blast gates has a single screw to lock the gate closed, and the screw can be installed on either side of the gate. It's important to put the screw on the tool side of the system and not on the dust collector side of the system. This is because the little gap that the gate uses to slide back and forth, as the screw is tightened, it will force the gate to the opposite side of that gap, or the opposite side of that housing, and therefore make the gap visible on one side of the gate, the side that has the screw. So if the gap is on the dust collector side, then you'll have a leaky blast gate. Again, as much work as possible was done on the ground level before lifting it into place. This branch to the miter saw station wasn't installed level, and that was on purpose just to get the drop in the exact location I wanted it to be in. We added a 6-inch hose adapter on the other side of the blast gate, but I switched it out to a section of straight pipe the next day. I cut a section of straight pipe. The cut pipe goes about halfway into the box down below, and that's literally it for the miter saw station. It actually works incredibly well. Back at the larger tool island is more of the same. Another 666 branch, and that just means that all three ends are 6 inches in diameter, with a 644 branch on each end. The blast gates, they're installed above the 644 branches so that a minimum of 2 4-inch ports are open at all times. I don't have a single 4-inch blast gate in this entire system. This keeps the airflow going in the Cyclone, which is necessary to separate the real fine particles. Reducing the system to a single 4-inch port can actually starve the dust collector of air and cause more of these small particles to bypass the Cyclone. They're not going to be separated and then go into the filters. Here's a better look at one of the 644 branches. This one will be installed at the table saw island. On the bottom of each 4-inch end of the branch, a 4-inch hose adapter is installed. Again, more of the exact same installation. And finally, the system can be turned on, and the unscientific testing of putting your hand under an open blast gate or an open port and being amazed at how it gets sucked into the port, all that can begin. Now, I didn't have any sawdust from the machines because at this point I'm yet to make anything in the shop, but I did have a bucket full of dust from my shop vac Cyclone that I could at least test the suction with. And of course, this dust collection system sucks. I feel like it's kind of mandatory to say that little joke there. Dust collection system, it sucks. Haha. The table saw drop marked the end of a very productive day with Paul and his son Josh. In just 5 hours of work, we built and installed the entire EF5 dust collector, assembled the entire dust collection system exactly how it was designed in the planning stage, and recorded the entire process, which always slows everything down. It was one of the most productive, error-free days I have ever had in my shop,
And most of that is a result of good planning on the front end. I've always been an advocate of planning before working. And part of that has to do with the fact that this NordFab Quick Fit system, it literally is like Legos for adults. It's a high quality, future-proof system that I'm really glad that I purchased. While installing the system, Paul mentioned that I should have put a floor sweep in for convenience reasons. The reason I didn't put one into the layout was because in my last shop, it just wasn't worth having. The concrete was extremely rough, so the only way to sweep was to sweep aggressively, which pulled a lot of the dust into the air, which is not what I wanted. I just preferred to vacuum in the last shop rather than sweep. In this shop, the concrete is stained and sealed, and it's really smooth, which is really nice. I found out that this floor is easily cleaned by simply dragging a dust mop around. No heavy push broom sweeping. So I ended up taking Paul's advice, and I purchased a floor sweep and another 666 branch to install at the table saw drop. Now this was about 2 weeks after the initial install took place, and it further shows just how easy the system is to modify as your needs change. And once again, this dust collection system sucks. Haha.
Fast forward to present day, a couple weeks after install, and the entire system is working amazingly. So I have not done anything with the filters. They just sit in the corner, but I don't think there's any need for me to do anything with these filters. They just sit there, no problem. But I can make some type of bracket to hold them to the wall if necessary. And I may or may not make some brackets to make this hose, a little bit more of an arc, but it just blows that way anyway when it's dust collectors on. So I don't think that's necessary either. Anyway, the EF5 is working really, really well. Right off of it, we have a 5-foot section. Now it's important to have a straight 5-foot section before the Cyclone just to reduce turbulence in there. You don't want necessarily a bend of any kind. You want to have a straight section to reduce turbulence right in the Cyclone. Right off of it, we have a 9-degree elbow. This little 9-degree elbow makes this come back to horizontal, and we have a Y branch going off to the miter saw station. My blast gate is right up there, and while it does look pretty inconvenient, I have this little stick that allows me to open that extremely easily, and that's no problem at all. That pipe actually comes down and terminates somewhere in the air right about there. And dust collection is working really, really well right there. So I'm pleased at how easy that was to hook up, and it works just great. This is just a dust collection box, and all the interior seams are taped off. So as the air is being sucked in, it has to come from right here, which is right around your cut. Dust collection is amazing at the miter saw with that setup. Go back to the main trunk here, and we have another Y branch. This is all 6-inch, by the way, so it's a 666Y, 666Y, and this one comes over here, 6-inch being the diameter at all openings of the Y, another 666Y with blast gates right here, and each 6-inch blast gate opens up 2 4-inch ports. Back at the miter saw, I had a 6-inch port, or 6-inch blast gate, and a single 6-inch pipe down there. These are 2 4s, specifically this one, this blue one, going to the jointer planer combo, and I also have a Rockler Dust Right hose attachment on the end so I can use it to sweep up as necessary. This is a long 28-foot hose that's collapsible. This clear one, it has another one of these Rockler hose Dust Right attachments on it, and it goes to the CNC machine or the router table, and these are very easily accessed by standing right there in between the two. So nice little setup here. I can switch back and forth as needed. Now I wanted it like this because as I'm using the CNC machine, which is this white hose, this clear hose, I typically also use this Dust Right hose to clean up as I'm working on the CNC machine. So having one blast gate cover both of my needs for the CNC machine is nice. And then on this one, we have another 644Y, and these 2 4-inch ports, 4-inch hoses, both of those go to the bandsaw because this particular bandsaw has 2 4-inch ports. Now all of the blast gates are 6-inch blast gates because I did not want to starve the dust collector by only having one 4-inch port open on this particular system, because this particular system, these bigger Cyclones, are very efficient at separating the really fine particles so long as you don't starve them with airflow. They need some airflow, they need some velocity inside this Cyclone to actually separate the really fine particles. So back to the main trunk, comes out over here to this setup, which has a 6-inch blast gate onto the floor sweep. Now in my last shop, I did not want a floor sweep because the floor itself was so rough and gritty that sweeping was not convenient because you're pushing more stuff up in the air. In this shop, I don't know if it's showing up on camera, but the floor is stained and sealed. It is very smooth. The previous owner was an automotive guy, so I imagine he made it nice and smooth so he can, you know, slide a creeper around or slide some stuff around. Anyway, the floor is set up really, really nice, which means I don't necessarily need a big push broom. This dust mop will sweep up the floor no problem without stirring dust up in the air, and therefore allow me to use this floor sweep really, really well. And on this side of this 666Y, we have another 644Y. Again, one blast gate on the 6-inch side, covering both of these 4-inch ports, just like I had it in my last shop. This one over here goes to the table saw. Because it is such a straight shot, I do need to reduce this hose length just a little bit, but I think I'm not going to because this gives me flexibility to wiggle the table saw around a little bit as needed, which I don't necessarily know if I'm going to need. But anyway, I may or may not, so indecisive, cut this little flex hose down just a little bit more. On this other side of the Y, we have a 28-inch, another one of these Rockler Dust Right hoses, and that looks way more aggressive than what it is. That's not really that bad of a bend, just the camera angle looks like it is. And it comes off on this other side, so if I go back to this side of the table saw, right here's where I'd typically be using it. It's on the bottom side of my lever router lift, and I can pull that off easily and set it on top of the drum sander, or again, sweep up on this side of the shop. So handy little setup. But that's it. This is the dust collection setup. It is working out really, really well. There's plenty enough space on top of my assembly table. By the way, assembly table, that's gonna be in a future video. I've already made that with this whole setup, and the bigger projects don't interfere with that at all. That's it with the dust collection system. Every bit of this system was just beyond my expectations. The performance is incredible. The ducting is crazy simple and easy to do. The whole system installation, 6 hours from being in boxes to being completely set up, that's crazy to think about. A lot of that also has to do with proper planning on the front end, which is like any other project. You know, the better you plan, the more efficient your time is going to be when you're actually in the shop. But yeah, it's just a crazy awesome system. Thank you to Paul and his son Josh for coming out to give me a hand that day to install this Clearview EF5 dust collection system. I do have a little coupon code if you want to save a little bit of money on your Clearview system, then check out that code and save some money. There's nothing wrong with that. So that's it for this one. The assembly table will be in another video. I know that wasn't there when we started, but you guys take care, have a great day, and I'll talk to you in the next video.